Title: Groom refused to marry the black bride, but the powerful Korean Mafia boss stood up and said, "She is mine." Chapter 1. The altar of erasure. Amara knew that feeling intimately. She had waited for this moment her entire adult life, not just for marriage, but for the specific, crystalline proof that she was chosen. Loved. Enough. She stood at the head of the aisle in a sculpted ivory gown that had taken her 3 months to commission. Her natural hair coiled, regal, threaded with tiny gold pins that caught the sun, was a crown without apology. Her hands, wrapped around a bouquet of white peonies and trailing gold ribbon, did not tremble. She had made sure of that. Derek stood before her. He was handsome in a forgettable way, the kind of man whose good looks you remembered but whose character you later struggled to describe. He wore his tuxedo like a costume. He was not looking at her. That was the first tremor. The officiant, a gray-haired man with a practiced smile, cleared his throat and began. The words rolled out in their ancient, formal procession. "Dearly beloved, gathered here. This woman. This man." Then Derek lifted his eyes to hers, and in that brief, catastrophic second, Amara read everything. She had spent 2 years learning the grammar of this man's silences. She knew the difference between his uncomfortable pause and his apologetic one. Between the silence of a man gathering courage and the silence of a man losing it. What she saw in his eyes was not cold feet. It was not nerves. It was the specific cruelty of a man who had already decided. Derek. The officiant prompted gently, sensing the stillness spreading through the crowd like a held breath. Derek cleared his throat. He looked for one awful second at the front row at his mother, a rigid, pale-faced woman who had spent 18 months quietly, systematically communicating to Amara that she was welcome but not quite right, not quite what they'd imagined. Derek stopped. Amara felt the earth shift beneath her heels. "I can't do this." His voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silence of 400 held breaths, it rang like a gunshot. The quiet that followed was not peaceful. It was the quiet of a crowded theater when a light goes out, collective disorientation, the frantic recalibration of what is real. Someone behind Amara made a sharp, involuntary sound. A chair scraped. A woman near the front pressed a hand to her mouth. Amara did not move. She stood at the altar, bouquet in hand, and felt the entire architecture of her imagined future collapse silently. Internally, like a building demolished from within, no rubble, no sound, just the sudden shocking absence of something that had been there a moment before. Derek was speaking again. Low, rushed words about needing to be honest, about not being fair to her, about feelings that had changed. His eyes moved everywhere except her face. But Amara was no longer listening to Derek. Because from the third row on the left, a man had risen to his feet. He did it without urgency, without theater. He simply stood the way a mountain is simply there, and the action itself commanded the room's attention with a gravity that Derek's stumbling confession could never achieve. He was Korean, impeccably suited in charcoal so dark it absorbed the afternoon light. His face was carved and still. His eyes, from across the flower-strewn aisle, were fixed entirely on her, not on Derek. Not on the scene. On her. "That," said King Jin-ho, his voice low and unhurried, carrying effortlessly through the stunned silence, "will not be necessary." He stepped into the aisle. "She is mine." Chapter 2. The dragon steps forward. It was not fear exactly, though fear was certainly present. It was something more primordial, the instinctive recognition of a being operating on a frequency too concentrated for ordinary social situations. He moved through the garden with the same unhurried certainty with which, it was said among certain circles, he moved through every room in his life. Men like Jin-ho did not enter spaces. Spaces reorganized themselves around his presence. He stopped at Amara's side. Up close, she could see the fine structure of his face, angular, composed, ageless in the way that men of total self-possession sometimes are. He smelled of something expensive and clean, like dark wood and rain. He did not look at her with the soft, pitying expression of someone offering charity. He looked at her the way a man examines a rare and serious work of art, with focus, with recognition. "I apologize for the disruption," he said to the officiant, his English precise, faintly accented. He said it with the courtesy of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Then he turned not to Derek but to the congregation, and he spoke clearly enough for every last row to hear. I am Kang Jin-ho. I am a business associate of the Park family. A beat of silence. I have watched this woman stand at this altar with more grace and dignity than this occasion deserves, and I will not allow her to stand here one moment longer without the recognition she has earned. He turned to Amara. His eyes, she realized, were not cold. They were still the way deep water is still. Something moved beneath the surface, but it was not impulsive. It was considered. You do not know me, he said quietly for her alone. And you are under no obligation to accept what I am about to offer. But I am a man who recognizes worth. And what is standing in front of me is worth far more than what is being discarded here today. Amara's mouth was dry. Her heart had been beating at an abnormal rhythm since Derek's confession, but now it steadied, not because she felt rescued, but because she felt, for the first time in this terrible afternoon, that someone was speaking to her as though she were not a problem to be managed, but a person of consequence. What are you doing? Derek had found his voice. It came out thin and confused, the voice of a man realizing too late what he was losing. Jin-ho did not look at him. He continued to look at Amara, as if Derek were a footnote in a document that did not require his attention. I'm correcting a miscalculation, Jin-ho said simply. In the front row, Derek's mother had gone the color of uncooked dough. Several guests were filming on their phones. The string quartet had stopped playing, their instruments hanging uselessly in their hands. The officiant appeared to be having a quiet spiritual crisis. But Amara stood in the eye of it all and felt something unexpected unfurl inside her. Not relief, not gratitude, something older and more structural, the slow, tectonic movement of a woman remembering who she was before she had shrunk herself into the shape of another person's comfort. She looked at Jin-ho. She looked at his steady, serious face and understood, with a clarity that cut through the chaos like a blade, that whatever this man was, and she suspected the answer to that question was complicated, he was not lying. He saw her, not the dress, not the spectacle, her. My car is at the east gate, Jin-ho said, his voice still low, still unhurried. The offer is not romantic, it is practical. You deserve somewhere to go that is not back into the wreckage of this. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed something cool in her free hand, a plain black business card, weighty as intent. The decision is entirely yours. He stepped back one pace, and he waited. Chapter 3. The slow poison. Amara had met Derek at a fundraiser for a children's literacy program where she had been volunteering since she was 23. He had bumped into her at the juice table, spilled passion fruit onto the tablecloth, and apologized with such genuine, embarrassed charm that she had laughed in spite of herself. He had asked for her number 3 times before she gave it to him. She had liked that he asked 3 times. The first year was easy. He was attentive and warm and laughed loudly at her jokes. He introduced her to his friends as the smartest woman in any room she walks into. And she had believed, with all the earnest fullness of a woman trying to receive love without flinching, that he meant it. His family was the first layer. His mother, Margaret Holloway, received Amara at Sunday dinners with a smile that never reached the specific muscle groups responsible for genuine warmth. She commented, regularly, on Amara's hair. Not negatively, always with the studiedly innocent curiosity of a woman who could plausibly claim she simply found it interesting. She asked at the first Christmas where Amara's family was originally from, in a tone that communicated she already considered Ghana an unnecessarily complex answer. She made remarks about the wedding whenever the subject arose about what the family aesthetic called for: cream and white florals, simple, classic. She just needs time to get used to you, Derek would say, in the voice of a man who had spent his life translating his mother to the people she wounded. Amara had believed him. That was the second layer. She had restructured herself incrementally. A quiet, incremental excavation of her own personality performed so gradually she had not noticed until most of herself was missing. She wore her hair differently for his family events, the elaborate natural style she loved replaced with something smoother, more manageable. She stopped referencing her grandmother's proverbs because Derek's friends went awkwardly quiet. She learned to laugh at the right moments and hold her tongue at the others. She had thought this was compromise. It was, in fact, disappearance. The third layer came 8 months before the wedding. A discovered text thread on Derek's phone between him and his mother, spanning 6 months, in which Margaret Holloway outlined, with the methodical patience of someone composing a legal brief, all the reasons Amara was unsuitable. Not unkind, the messages said. Not a bad person. Simply not what they had envisioned. Simply not quite right. Derek's responses, and this was the layer that had no name for the pain it caused, were not defenses. They were negotiations. He did not say, "You are wrong about her." He said, "I think she can adapt." He said, "Give her a chance." He said in one message that Amara had read 4 times before it fully registered, "I know she's not what we planned, but I love her. I can make this work. I can make this work. Not, she is the right person. Not, you are the one who needs to change. I can make this work," as if she were a difficult project. A renovation of questionable structural integrity. She had not confronted him. She had told herself the wedding was months away, that people said things to their parents they didn't mean, that love was not always articulate. She had told herself so many careful, constructed things that by the time she stood at the Ashford estate altar in her commissioned ivory gown, she had almost convinced herself the text thread had been a bad dream. Almost. She had known, the moment she saw his face, that the dream was the wedding. The text thread was the truth. She understood now, standing in the rearranged silence of the ceremony garden with Jin-ho's business card in her hand and her undone future at her feet, that she had not come to this altar to be married. She had come, without knowing it, to find out once and for all whether she was worth fighting for. Derek had given her his answer. The question now was what she intended to do with it. Chapter 4. The drop of the bouquet there was something she needed to do first, not for closure, that overused word that promised more than it delivered, but for precision. There was a specific, necessary thing she needed to say before she closed this chapter, and she intended to say it in the register it deserved. Not screaming, not weeping, not with the shaking hands and elevated pitch of a woman undone. She would say it clearly, in her own voice, in front of everyone who had sat in those cream-ribbon chairs and watched her be discarded. She turned to face Derek and Margaret Holloway, who had materialized at his shoulder, with the reliability of a shadow. The guests had not moved. 400 people, suspended in the amber of the afternoon's most extraordinary moment, watched Amara walk back toward the altar with a steadiness that confused them. They expected tears or rage or the chaotic exit of a humiliated woman. They received none of those things. She stopped 3 feet from Derek. She looked at him for a long moment without speaking, the way you look at a painting you once found beautiful and now simply see for what it is, brushstrokes and canvas, and the particular ambition of someone who wanted to create the impression of depth. "I want to thank you," she said. "That was not what anyone expected. I spent 2 years becoming smaller so I could fit into the space you allocated me. I changed my hair. I softened my voice. I translated myself for your family because you told me with great kindness that I needed to be patient." She let that settle. "I want to thank you for doing this here today in front of every person whose opinion you care about, because it means I cannot bargain with myself anymore. There is no version of this I can explain away." Derek opened his mouth. She continued. "You don't owe me a wedding. You never did. What you owed me was the honesty to say 2 years ago that you saw me as a project rather than a partner." Her voice did not waver. "I read the text, Derek. I have always known." Color drained from his face in a slow, visible tide. Margaret Holloway stiffened. For the first time in Amara's memory, the older woman had nothing to say. Amara turned to her. "Holloway." Her tone did not change, still even, still court quiet. "I want you to understand something. I was never asking for your approval. I was asking for your son's respect. Those are entirely different things, and only one of them was his to give." She looked down at the bouquet in her hands, the white peonies that had taken her 3 weeks to choose, the gold ribbon she had tied herself the morning before, the flowers she had carried down the aisle with such precise, determined hope. She placed them gently on the altar step, not thrown, not dropped in despair. Set down. With the quiet deliberateness of a woman laying down a burden she had been carrying for someone else. "I wish you both exactly what you've built together," she said. Then she turned her back on the altar, on the cream-ribbon chairs, on the string quartet standing with their instruments frozen in stunned silence, on the 400 witnesses who would spend the rest of the summer retelling what they had seen. She walked east. Jin-ho's car was exactly where he said it would be, a long black vehicle parked at the far edge of the estate, its engine a low and patient hum. He stood beside the open passenger door, not checking his watch, not looking at his phone, simply present, simply waiting. He did not ask if she was all right. He seemed to understand, with the particular intelligence of a man who paid close attention to the world, that the question was unnecessary. She was not all right. She would be. The distance between those two states was not something a question could shorten. He inclined his head slightly as she reached him, a gesture so precisely calibrated between courtesy and respect that it communicated volumes without condescension. She got in. The door closed. The sounds of the Ashford estate, the murmuring crowd, the distant music that had resumed with the awkward determination of professionals softened, then disappeared. In the silence of the car, Amara sat very still and felt the enormity of what she had just stepped away from. Not the wedding, the version of herself that had believed she needed to earn the right to take up space. "Where to?" Jin-ho asked, settling into the driver's seat with the same unhurried composure he brought to every motion. Amara looked out the window at the winding estate road curving ahead into the open afternoon. "Somewhere else," she said. He nodded once, as if that were the most complete direction he'd ever received, and drove. Chapter 5. The woman who curated her own life soul took approximately 3 months to stop feeling like a fevered dream. The language came to her in pieces, the way most real things do, not in the neat, sequential lessons of a textbook, but in fragments of daily life assembled over time. The way a barista at the cafe below Jin-ho's hotel said her name, rolling the vowels slightly differently each time, as if tasting the word. The word for the particular quality of afternoon light that fell through the gallery windows at 4 o'clock. The expression for the feeling of being a stranger who has, unexpectedly, arrived somewhere that feels like recognition. She had a word for that feeling now. She had several words for several feelings she'd previously had no language for. That, she discovered, was one of Seoul's first and most significant gifts. Jin-ho's involvement in the gallery had been precisely what he described at the altar: professional. He ran an organization, the legitimate arm of which was a hospitality and arts group called Kang International, that had spent 3 years building the Serenity Seoul, a luxury boutique hotel whose lobby was conceived as a living gallery for international artists. He had been looking for a curatorial director. He had found, on the morning of what was supposed to be her wedding, a woman with an eye that saw things most people missed, and a soul that had been broken open in exactly the right direction. The work was enormous, and Amara threw herself into it with the appetite of a person rediscovering hunger. She sourced artists from Lagos and Accra, from Kingston and Nairobi, from Seoul and Busan, and the quieter creative communities that didn't make the international art press but should have. She built exhibitions around themes that mattered to her, not trends, not algorithms, but the things she had needed to see art about when her own life was at its most unrecognizable. Identity, inheritance, the specific beauty of survival. The gallery became talked about, first in Seoul's tightly networked creative circles, then in the international design press, then in the kind of breathless, aspirational travel features that put places on the map for a certain class of global reader. Amara was interviewed, photographed, asked to speak at conferences. She did all of it in her own voice, in her natural hair, in the colors she had spent years quietly talking herself out of wearing. It was not without difficulty. There were months when she worked 18-hour days and fell asleep on the gallery floor surrounded by shipping invoices and artist contracts. There were setbacks, a cornerstone exhibition delayed by a customs dispute, a planned collaboration that dissolved, the slow and sometimes aching process of building a life in a country that was not hers, in a language she was still constructing. There was also Jin-ho. Their relationship grew with the deliberateness of something neither of them was willing to rush. He appeared at the gallery at the end of long days, Not with flowers, but with the specific tea from a place 3 streets away that she had mentioned once, in passing, was the only thing that helped when her head ached. He asked questions about the artists she was working with, real questions, the kind that required real answers, and listened with the complete attention of a man accustomed to information having consequence. She, in turn, understood him gradually. The discipline that read as coldness from a distance was, close up, a form of profound consideration. He did not perform warmth. He expressed it through action, through presence, through a quality of care so precise it felt like a language she was learning alongside Korean, slowly, in fragments, with the growing certainty that fluency was worth the effort. He had never lied to her. That, she had come to understand, was not a small thing. She was standing before the newest installation in the gallery's west wing when a message arrived from a distant friend at home. A brief, casual note about mutual acquaintances, the kind that carried news without quite meaning to. Derek and his family had apparently relocated. The Holloway household, it seemed, had been shaken by a financial dispute she did not need the details of. The wedding, her friend wrote with the specific tact of someone relaying bad news they suspected you'd been waiting for, had not, by any measure, produced the life they'd imagined. Amara read the message once. Then she put her phone away. She felt nothing that required attention. Not triumph, not pity. The quiet, complete absence of any lingering ownership over the outcome of someone else's choices. That was what freedom felt like. She had learned. Not happiness exactly, but the specific lightness of no longer carrying weight that was never hers to carry. She looked at the installation before her, a piece by a young artist from Accra who had spent 3 years salvaging shards of broken kente-patterned ceramic and rebuilding them into something new, the fractures filled not with gold, in the kintsugi tradition, but with a red-black resin the artist called the blood that stays. It was the most important piece in the gallery. It had made 3 people cry at the opening. Jin-ho came to stand beside her. She heard him before she saw him, the quiet, anchoring sound of his presence reorganizing the air. He handed her a cup of tea without comment. They stood in the amber light of the gallery and looked at the broken, rebuilt thing before them, and she thought about the version of herself who had stood at an altar in an ivory gown and felt the ground give way. She did not feel sorry for that woman. She did not feel distant from her either. She was that woman, reassembled, the cracks still there, still visible but filled now with something that held. "It is the best thing in the room," Jin-ho said, studying the sculpture. "I know," said Amara. Outside, Seoul moved in its relentless, luminous river of light and sound. Inside, the gallery was quiet. The tea was warm. The woman standing in the center of it had built every single thing she could see. There is a moment in every life when the story being written about you stops being theirs and starts being yours. It does not arrive with fanfare. It arrives in a quiet room where you are standing in front of something you have made, and you realize with a kind of cellular certainty that you are no longer waiting for permission. Have you had that moment yet? The one where you set down the bouquet, not in surrender but in choice. Where you walk east toward the car, not knowing where it goes, only knowing that you are done standing still in someone else's failure. If you haven't, it is coming. And when it does, I hope you walk toward it with both hands open, because the version of you on the other side of that altar is more than you have been allowed to imagine. Your story is waiting, and you, only you, hold the pen. The end.